Now that our son has moved out, you'll be returning to your family home. This house will be left empty and lonely, so we'll be moving in here instead. Don't worry, everything will be fine. My beloved husband passed away suddenly. After the funeral, my husband's parents came to me, overwhelmed with grief. This house, though filled with memories, few as they are, of the time I spent with my husband, is now a painful reminder of his absence. Why must I leave it so soon, without even a moment to wipe my tears? My mother-in-law told me coldly that I had no choice but to leave. My name is Hazel, and I work as a clerk at a real estate company. I met my husband Tom through my job. He was the brother of one of my colleagues, and since their workplaces were nearby, Tom often visited his brother. As a clerk, I was familiar with my colleague, who would eventually become my brother-in-law. Through him I met Tom, and we began spending time together, being invited to lunch by the brothers, and so on. Tom was cheerful and kind, and we got along well, though I didn't see him as a romantic interest at the time. I thought he felt the same way. However, an unexpected event changed everything. We had planned to meet at a restaurant reserved by my colleague, but he couldn't make it due to sudden matters. Though it was disappointing, we decided not to cancel the reservation, so Tom and I ended up spending time alone for the first time. I later discovered that my brother-in-law had orchestrated this, intending for Tom and me to be alone together over a meal. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, and we delved deeply into each other's lives, discovering how much we had in common. I was charmed by Tom's kind smile, and this day marked the beginning of a change in our relationship. It wasn't long before we got married, and I am deeply grateful to my brother-in-law for setting this in motion. Today was the first time I met my in-laws since our marriage. I was filled with anxiety, but my father-in-law and mother-in-law welcomed me warmly. Their friendly demeanor helped me relax. "Thank you for coming," my mother-in-law said, showing great care. "We've prepared a lot of food, hoping to make this a wonderful day." My in-laws, like my husband, had independent personalities and were approachable, which was a relief. They respected our decisions and never imposed their views on marriage or child-rearing. We talked about possibly living closer to them, but my husband and I had plans to build our own home. I inherited a piece of land from my grandfather, who was very fond of me. The property, recently renovated and located in a prime area, had skyrocketed in value due to recent redevelopment. As someone in real estate, I knew selling the property would be more advantageous than living in it. Although the location was excellent, the distance to our workplaces made it impractical to stay there. We decided to sell both the land and the house to fund our dream home. However, a significant change occurred when my husband, who worked in sales, was transferred to a different branch of his company. The corporation, with many branches nationwide, deemed him the only suitable candidate for the job, leaving us with no option but to accept. Given my own work commitments, we decided that he would go on a solo assignment, promising to return during the holidays. He also mentioned that my parents would come to visit occasionally, advising me not to push myself too hard and suggesting I might go out with them sometimes. "I don't mind going out. Your parents are nice people. However, it looks like selling the house will be delayed a bit, and my husband's solo assignment has begun." I felt a wave of loneliness and anxiety with the sudden change, but I had to push those feelings aside and look forward to reuniting with my husband as he had suggested. My in-laws, especially my mother-in-law, frequently visited on weekends. It seemed that my father-in-law used to be away on business trips, and my mother-in-law often shared her experiences of enduring loneliness while caring for her young sons. Even without children, she encouraged creating family memories, suggesting outings as a nice change of pace. "Let's go out together. Shopping might be a nice change," my mother-in-law would say. Thanks to her, I never felt completely alone, and my weekends became quite busy. However, I started to notice a pattern. Almost every weekend, she would suggest going out, and while the outings themselves were enjoyable, her insistence grew more forceful over time. After about a month, her invitations began to feel a bit pushy. She started disregarding whether I was tired or had household chores. When I mentioned wanting to rest, she looked at me as if I was being unreasonable. "It's fun to go out together, right? You don't dislike being with me, do you?" she would ask. "It's not that," I replied. "It's just that we go out every week and I think you should rest too." She looked disappointed at my response, but when I reluctantly agreed, she would smile brightly, acting as if she had forgotten how persistent she had been. My concerns about her behavior grew. The places she insisted on taking me were always high-end, featuring expensive shopping and costly meals. Often she would leave the store first, making it seem like I was expected to cover the bill. She never thanked me for these payments, nor did she offer to contribute later. While my husband and I were financially comfortable, having both been committed to saving, I found my mother-in-law's extravagance unsettling. This issue persisted even when my father-in-law was present, and his presence only seemed to increase my financial burden. Discussing the issue with my husband was challenging. He had promised to come home during the holidays, but his work was extremely demanding, and he rarely had the chance to return. During a video call, I noticed the dark circles under his eyes and his haggard appearance, indicating his exhaustion. I'd understood that discussing this issue with my in-laws would only add to the stress. So I put on a brave face and said, "Your mother has been really good to me. You take care of yourself, Tom." "I'm fine, so don't worry." Despite my reassurances, I continued to cover expenses related to my in-laws, unable to refuse their requests. Their behavior escalated, and one day, when I said I couldn't go out, they asked, "Could we borrow a little money? Just a small amount. We've already made a restaurant reservation and we'll take another friend instead of you, so could you lend us the shortfall?" I really didn't want to lend them money, but refusing would only complicate matters further. Reluctantly, I agreed. I reluctantly accepted my mother-in-law's request and withdrew the money from my wallet. Even then, I didn't discuss this situation with my husband. When I mentioned to my mother-in-law that I might bring it up with Tom, she responded that it would be embarrassing to talk to him about it. I was stunned. It seemed she was trying to take advantage of her son's wife rather than addressing her eldest son directly. I stopped expecting anything from my mother-in-law. Her requests for money became routine, disguised as pocket money, and I complied to avoid further pressure. I knew the problem was escalating, but found it difficult to address with her directly. Her behavior became increasingly bewildering and intrusive. She would suddenly visit our home without notice and inspect the interior closely, as if invading my privacy was her right. "This piece of furniture, a relic from Hazel's grandfather, it's lovely. You have such high-quality items here," she would say, admiring everything as if it were her own. Some of our furniture had been cherished by my grandfather, and my mother-in-law seemed fascinated by it, visiting frequently just to gaze at it. I began to seriously consider discussing her behavior with my husband. Although he might be surprised, it would be a relief to find a solution together. Her actions were intolerable, and although she was my mother-in-law, invading my privacy was unacceptable. I resolved to talk to my husband, but I also knew I had to wait until his assignment away from home ended. Hoped that his return would put an end to my mother-in-law's demands for money. With a faint hope, I persevered, looking forward to reuniting with him. Then an unexpected situation arose. Tom collapsed and was rushed to the hospital due to a sudden heart attack, likely from overwork. I was in shock when I received the call from his workplace. I rushed to the hospital, but despite the ambulance's speed, it was too late. The man who had always been the picture of health had passed away. I couldn't grasp the reality of it and was in a daze throughout the funeral. To be honest, I hardly remember anything from that time due to the overwhelming sense of loss. My brother-in-law came to assist, taking on many of the duties I would normally have handled. "You've just lost your brother too. I'm sorry for making you help so much," I said. "It's my brother's funeral. Of course I should help," he replied. "By the way, how are things with the land? Is the house ready?" After the funeral, my brother-in-law and I discussed the situation regarding the land and house. While tidying up, I reluctantly agreed to a proposal from my brother-in-law, assuring him it was fine. A few days after my husband's funeral, my in-laws arrived at our house, but it was immediately clear they were not here to offer condolences. "It's unfortunate that our son passed away so suddenly, but don't worry, we're here for you," my mother-in-law said with an unnervingly forced smile. To my shock, she had brought a truck filled with furniture and belongings from their family home. I was speechless, confused, and taken aback. It was obvious they were preparing to move in without any prior discussion. Their motives were clear. "You're after this land, aren't you?" I asked, my voice icy. My mother-in-law, with a cold smile, responded, "The value of this land has increased significantly. I've always had my eye on this house. It's thanks to this place that you could marry my son. I agreed to the marriage because you inherited this land." My heart sank as I struggled to process her words. "Are you saying you and father-in-law will be moving in with me?" I asked, bewildered. "Of course not. Don't be ridiculous," she snapped sharply, revealing her true intention to take over the house regardless of Tom's death. It became clear that they were planning to kick me out and claim the land for themselves, assuming I would vacate the house now that my husband was gone. "Now that your son is gone, you'll go back to your hometown, right? It would be sad to leave the house empty, so we'll live here instead," my mother-in-law said with a smile that only deepened my anxiety. I felt a surge of terror as I corrected her. "This house has already been sold," I said, struggling not to laugh at her misunderstanding. My mother-in-law's expression shifted to shock, and she stood there dumbfounded. At that moment, a truck from another moving company arrived. "Excuse us, we're here to help you move," the new movers said, confirming their presence after spotting the truck from the other company. The crew arranged by my mother-in-law also emerged from their vehicle, but their work had yet to begin. Seeing the other movers' arrival seemed to alert them that something was amiss. I asked my in-laws to explain their actions, but they were too flustered to respond clearly. Realizing that arguing wouldn't help, I instructed the movers arranged by my in-laws to move their truck away. I then bluntly told my in-laws, "This house has already been sold to someone else and they're scheduled to move in. We can't let you bring your belongings into someone else's home." To the surprise of both my in-laws and the movers, a luxury car pulled up and a wealthy-looking family stepped out. They were the new owners of the house and land, which were no longer mine. My in-laws were further confused and couldn't comprehend the situation. "Please move your truck quickly," I said firmly. "We need to clear the space for our new residents." As the truck from my in-laws' side moved away, the new movers began moving in the furniture. Unable to accept the situation, my in-laws confronted me aggressively. The new male homeowner, ensuring his family's safety, left them in the car and rushed over to us, adding to the commotion. "What's going on here? We bought this house. Why is there another moving truck? Please leave immediately," he demanded. I had no choice but to apologize profusely for the confusion caused by my in-laws' unexpected visit. However, they refused to leave and forcibly entered the house. The interior had changed significantly from what they remembered. None of the furniture they were familiar with was present. Seeing this, my mother-in-law panicked and started to create a scene. "What is this? The house is empty. There are no antiques, no lights. Those were my favorites. What's going on?" she cried out, unable to grasp the situation. Despite the new homeowner threatening to call the police, she remained stunned. My father-in-law seemed to snap out of his daze when he heard the man's voice. He quickly went over to my mother-in-law and dragged her out of the house. She calmed down a bit once she was away from the property. I apologized again to the new homeowner, who warned that there might be further trouble. At his request, I provided him with my in-laws' names and addresses to help resolve the situation. Exhausted but resolute, I went back to my in-laws to explain what had happened. I clarified that we had already completed the move a few days before my husband passed away, and that we had always planned to sell the house and the land. The sale had gone through as planned, despite a temporary delay due to my husband's solo work assignment. My brother-in-law had played a significant role in managing this. I had been overwhelmed by the demands for money from my in-laws and had kept it to myself to avoid adding to my husband's worries. This led to a deep sense of depression. During this time, my brother-in-law, who has always had a strained relationship with my in-laws, was my support. He'd assured me he would help and keep everything confidential. When he heard my story, he was furious with my in-laws. As an employee of a real estate company and my husband's brother, he was well aware of their plans. He had considered Tom his only family, but saw me as family as well. He suspected that my in-laws either intended to move into the house themselves or force us out to take over. According to him, my in-laws were naive, pretentious, boastful, and unscrupulous, especially my mother-in-law. Despite presenting a gracious facade in public, my mother-in-law was actually self-centered, cunning, and malicious. My brother-in-law's insights into my in-laws were shocking. My husband, the eldest son, was unaware of their true nature, likely because they always maintained a polished front. My brother-in-law suggested that we sell the land before my in-laws could take it from us. I agreed and began making the necessary arrangements. Although the house and land were important heirlooms from my grandfather, I didn't want to keep them if they were going to cause issues in my marriage. I didn't want to involve such cherished property in any further disputes. I had discussed this thoroughly with my husband, and when he learned of my in-laws' actions, he expressed regret for not realizing their true nature sooner. "I'm sorry I didn't see this before," he said. "If you think it's best to sell, let's do it before my parents can interfere. I'm truly sorry about letting go of Grandpa's house. I think Grandpa would have preferred us to move on rather than let it cause us problems." With that decision made, the first step was to find a new home and move without alerting my in-laws to our plans. Thanks to my brother-in-law's expertise in real estate, we quickly found a buyer for the house. We set a reasonable price considering the slight wear from our time there. The new owners, the family who had just arrived, signed the contract promptly. Originally, I had planned to wait for Tom to return to our new home, but now that he was gone, this was my only regret. As the movers began bringing in the new furniture, my in-laws could only watch in disbelief. The movers they had hired, angry and confused, demanded an explanation for the situation. They confronted my in-laws, who were too distraught to provide a coherent answer. After some trouble, the movers decided to leave for the day, but warned that additional fees would be incurred due to the unexpected circumstances. Realizing the truth, my mother-in-law, trembling and distraught, grasped at my clothes. "This is the house of my eldest son's wife. This is where we should live, right?" She tried to justify herself, but I ignored her and left with my belongings. The land now belonged to a new family, and I had no rights to it. The memorial service for my husband went smoothly, though my in-laws were present but left without addressing the house. Our interactions dwindled, and I found peace in my new life, even though I faced the sorrow of Tom's loss. Though I had savings from the sale of the house, Tom was no longer with me, and our plans for a new house had vanished. I tried to move forward, cherishing Tom's memory and returning to work. Meanwhile, my in-laws, especially my mother-in-law, seemed increasingly dissatisfied. I hadn't informed them of my new address, not wanting any further contact, which frustrated them greatly. Unable to visit their distant second son and not knowing my address, my mother-in-law's frustration grew. One night, she scattered gasoline around the house we had sold. Fortunately, a passerby noticed her suspicious behavior, and she was quickly restrained before any serious damage occurred. The police were alerted and she was arrested for attempted arson after a lighter was found in her possession. The new homeowner, furious to discover that she was the same woman who had previously intruded, was understandably distressed. When I received a call about a lawsuit from the homeowner, I apologized profusely for the fear and inconvenience they had endured. there was nothing I could do to change my mother-in-law's actions. Unable to let go of her obsession with the house, my mother-in-law faced charges and was arrested. I repeatedly apologized to the homeowner, gaining some understanding and vowing that such an incident would never happen again. Raised in a wealthy environment where she could have anything, my mother-in-law's frustration and jealousy over not getting the house led her to commit a crime, ultimately landing her in prison. Ideally, my father-in-law should have supported her, but their relationship deteriorated after her arrest, leading to a forced divorce on his part. Even when she is released, she will have no home to return to. This is the result of her own choices. Despite feeling the loss of my husband, my brother-in-law provided comfort, reminding me that I still have family through him. Although my relationship with my in-laws has ended, I have not completely lost my sense of family. Believing that my husband is watching over me from heaven, I have decided to live my days in peace.